Welcome to this debate. This is the second in our debate series on the effects and challenges of the COVID pandemics and the corona crisis that everybody is talking about at the moment. Today's debate focuses on the economy and places the current economic challenges in relation to the 2009 financial crisis, addressing some of the potential consequences of the pandemics. And before I say a couple more sentences about this, I present today's key speaker. I would ask my colleague Andrea Bank Christensen to explain a few things about Zoom and the questions.
Yeah, hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to be doing some behind the scenes work on the technical stuff. So first I have to tell you that you're all muted at the moment, and I'm going to keep you muted unless you're asked to ask your question, and then you can unmute yourself and ask it to either Slatko or Karen. For now, we'll start with the introduction at the lecture from Karen, and then there will be the option to ask questions later. If you have a question you would like to ask, you can write it to me out in the chat function. You can find that in the bar at the bottom of your screen where it says chat. And then I'll make sure to note you down, and Slack will let you know when you can ask your question. If you don't have a mic or would prefer not to ask it yourself, you can write the question to me and I'll read it out loud for you. The whole debate today is going to be on English, but if you have any questions about that or something that didn't quite follow catch, you can also write me and I will do my best to catch you up. And then I would like to say that you can choose different viewing options if you're using a laptop, it's in the three small dots that should be around here-ish on your screen in the top right corner, where you can choose speaker view or gallery view. I would suggest you choose speaker view, so the person who is speaking is the person who you see as the largest picture on your screen. If you're using a tablet, it's in the three small dots, which should also be in the top right. That's also, I think, where you can find the chat version, chat function if you are on a tablet. If there's anything else, of course, just write and I'll try to help as best I can. Back to you, Slatko.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So welcome again. And now we are ready to start a debate, which tonight is going to be, as I said, about some of the most of the economic issues relating to the pandemic. The title for tonight is Epidemic Economy, the Left Perspective. And some of the questions we want to ask concern whether pandemic is going to lead to further strengthening of the left-wing ideas that have been gaining ground in the recent years, or on the opposite, are we going to see the further monopolization and concentration of market power? With us and as a key speaker tonight is Karen Helveg Petersen. She's a political economist. She holds a PhD in this, and she works also worked as a consultant within international development, focusing mostly on countries in Africa. Thank you very much for being with us, Karen, and I'm looking very much forward to your presentation tonight.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to be able to speak to this subject, which is very vast. So to my dear public, you must excuse me for being very wide in my presentation. So I cannot go that deeply into many subjects, but I will, on the other hand, try to cover as many aspects as possible of the question, because otherwise we narrow our focus too much. I mean, you can put up the presentation, thank you. And the presentation will be in PowerPoint, and and it is about the epidemic economy and the left perspective. So what is the situation? The situation is that we have had various crises since the crisis of 2007, 2008, And we call them crises. Maybe they were depressions, maybe they were recessions, maybe they were other problems, but we call them crises, although they were really long-term problems. We have a direct legacy of the financial crisis, which was that in 2012-15, particularly in Europe, we had many countries, those in the south, got into big problems. It is called the sovereign debt crisis, where that debt became unsustainable, and the European Central Bank had to invent a lot of different instruments in order to rescue these countries. And we also know some of the effects of that. What have we seen too? We have seen a continuation of financial scandals, money laundering being one of them, dividend tax fraud, the so-called CumEx files. And we have seen also an increase in corporate tax evasion and use of offshore tax havens. This has become ever more important. Then, not directly related, we have the so-called refugee crisis in 2015, which was the aftermath of the Arab Spring and the wars in the Middle East, or the uprisings in the Middle East, the Syrian and Iraqi, Iranian and Afghani refugees that came into Europe, and some from Northern Africa, plus poverty migrants from particularly Africa. That also became known as a crisis. And then last but not, well, second last, we have the climate crisis. It was only in recent years that the world started talking about a climate crisis, although Al Gore introduced the term many years ago. But what we see anyway is the crisis that the 1.5 degrees, that is a goal not to surpass increase in temperatures, that this measure will soon be reached. And so the chances of not getting to 2 degrees are also very slim. Various tipping points have been reached. So this is an ongoing crisis that there are various responses to. And then finally, the COVID crisis in 2020. Next. Yeah, next slide. Yeah. So what were the power structure responses? We have seen that the central banks were very much called upon. I'm here talking about the major central bank, the Fed in the US, the ECB, and the Bank of England. They kept money markets liquid through bond purchase programs and floated markets with the liquidity and thereby boosting asset prices. At the public international level, we have seen some strengthening of banking standards and regulations, but not a lot. So basically, the same structures beneath the financial crisis have been left untouched. Governments answered with austerity, fiscal restraints. They helped the private sector by welfare and social program and gave tax reductions to the wealthy and to corporations. The private sector cut down wages, tightening work conditions, and at the same time, we have seen the platform economy rising and precarity mounting. Governments obviously have been scared of vested, including agro-industrial interests. They have not been very much caving in to lift demands. And when it comes to the the climate crisis, governments have set CO2 targets, but either they have not been following up, or if they do, they have mostly been supporting or stimulating private business ventures. There have been some learnings through the mistakes in the crisis responses. Next. Well, the financial crisis and the aftermath. It spurred the Occupy movement, one can say. So a lot of people got active, but it was a headless movement which had no real stringent analysis, and its main objective was to sort of to denounce the 1% wealthy as the main tenet. New political parties arose, Podemos in Spain, Syriza in Greece, and Five Star Movement in Italy. They have all entered government at one time, but now they seem to be exhausted. Syriza lost to the Troika, the ECB powers, Podemos was overwhelmed, and the Five Star Movement has not really even been a very leftist movement, but a strange construct. What we have seen also has been the Corbyn and the Sanders phenomena, the left social democracy in the UK and the US, which is sort of a new thing, one can say. And then what we have is on the international scene also, it has changed for not necessarily the same reason, but it has changed. We have had Trump populism. Trump has introduced trade barriers and worked on reshoring of production. And so that outsourcing is being turned on its head. China is rising in the global south through huge infrastructure investments, Belt and Road Initiative, with hydro dams and a lot of other infrastructure. And on the other hand, you have China as a partner of the West. It has reached a stage where its own role as a hub for outsourcing is waning. It is less interested in Western capital, and Western capital is also, and industry is withdrawing at the same time. So that is what's going on behind all the rhetoric. Rising tensions between the US and the EU on one side, and Russia and China on the other hand, various issues of Ukraine, Middle East, even talks about a new Cold War. Effects of global warming is changing the global politics, focus on the Arctic, and we have trouble spots in the world that are sort of ongoing all the time. We have Latin America that is in trouble for various reasons. We have Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, which is a new hotspot. And Peru, it may be changing in other ways politically, but altogether, Latin America is in a bit of a trouble. The COVID crisis itself led to massive lockdowns. Unemployment and bankruptcies rose, negative GDP growth continuing into 2021. There was an output loss in the US estimated at nearly $8 trillion as of October 2020. The UK, I've seen a figure of 700 billion pounds. Anyway, these are just numbers that give some indications. A rise in poverty and precarity has also been seen. And we have massive health costs for testing, identifying, and all the other costs. And all these costs are not known as of yet, and who is carrying them. Then another phenomenon, some of the most advanced countries have shown to have weak institutions. Germany, for example, has very little digitization of its public services and has been very slow in moving on some of these areas. And so next slide, please. And what have we seen more? Namely, that the governments have assumed massive debt in support of the private sector, wage support, and expanded unemployment benefits, even helicopter money to low-income families in the US. And so some social costs have been assumed too. The rescue packages all over the world amount to trillions of US dollars, 3 or 4 so far, but it's not known. And the other phenomena, central bank liquidity injections, which is not the same thing, have fueled financial markets again and even more, so that shares, bonds, and property markets have been booming. Negative interest rates in major capital centers are continuing. Households, on the other hand, have in the West massive bank savings, in part stimulating housing, and also purchases of assets, even cryptocurrencies, a new phenomenon. Growth is now in the increase. After all of that, in the first quarter of 2021, the growth in the US is estimated at 6.4%, China 18%. And well, here in Denmark, it's minus still, but it will be positive this year. And the new phenomenon is inflation, which many people have wanted for so long. Now it's finally coming. In the US, 4.2%, and in Europe overall, it's 1.6%. as of April 2021, but increasing in May 2021, and everybody expected to increase more. And then you have the public debt, which is increasing, and especially this will become a problem in the global south, which has also seen many adverse effects, and whose debt was assumed based on some growth that has not been coming. So that will be a real problem, whereas the debt in our part of the world is sort of sustainable, some people say, because of the zero interest rates. But on the other hand, the interest rates also may be increasing. Inflation causes, more inflation causes than just the government actions. We have seen supply chain disruptions, higher container transport prices, delivery problems of semiconductors, higher commodity prices, raw materials, and incipient shortage of labor. Shocks, we have also seen the Suez Canal disaster. And this is added to the massive infusion of government debt finance consumption and investments and so on, and without the corresponding capacity in production and distribution rising at the same time because of this disruption. So there's a lot of pressure on markets, which is then leading to price increases. And an interesting phenomenon that housing prices have been going ballistic, as the Economist wrote, in the rich world. Finally, market interest rates, including the effective yields on government debt, are rising. So some people are happy, but if major central banks will try to hold them down, they will fuel inflation even more. So they are in a bind. Next, please. Next. Yeah, the North-South divide. Well, we have also other questions. Now we have the Israel-Palestine conflict and inequities coming back to the center. Autocratic dictatorial tendencies, various coups and demonstrations and so on and so forth, but also not only in Myanmar, Belarus and so on, but also in the West, we're talking about freedoms being restricted in various ways. Governments try to control the public discourse, debate, science and universities. And there's talk about that. And are these the concerns of the left? Yes, but not necessarily the same ways as the powers that be see them. And the powers that be tend to see them in the same old pattern. And the new presidency of Biden, what can he do even if he wants to? Can he change these patterns? Will he do that? That is a very open question. Well, now he's in a G7 meeting, but I don't think we expect a lot of changes. But the left has to do its own analysis. The poorer countries are definitely suffering under the COVID crisis and experiences a new backlash. And Africa, on the other hand, in Africa, there are also other signs that it is slowly carving out its own new path. Next, please. Next, yeah, the class perspective, an interesting thing. Class perspective is sort of coming back to center stage. Class struggle is reinvigorated. Class analysis is being done in the left, and there's a class war from above. Or what is it? It is anyway very clear that class has to do with access to wealth, and because many people are kept out of wealth. So this is a major issue in that respect. So encouraging from the left perspective, trade union membership is increasing. Unions are taking on new roles in the gig economy and getting a few little victories. Class struggles will be strengthened if economies boom, an advantage when the markets burst, because inevitably they will. If interest rates keep rising and so on and so forth, there will be problems. And but we have also the ongoing working class nationalism, conservatism, and populism that is fed from the right. And then we have a lack of leftist unity across borders. At least we don't have a very strong movement across borders, be it in the political arena, in the theoretical analysis, in the workers' organizations. All of these are not very well articulated internationally. And we have seen also, I think that Corbyn in the UK, he heard Labour's prospects of going to the left by not being able to formulate a Brexit policy, which should, in my analysis anyway, have been remain rather than the opposite. And this sort of hithering and dithering has left the left also hanging. Next, please. What is more, a megatrend, productivity developments, and new growth scenarios. Technological developments have long been the agenda, and the question is technology optimism or not. A lot of failed projects in technology and abuse of data through technology. Productivity has not increased as expected. With all this computing power, one should expect that it would increase, but as it is measured, it has not. That has been simply because in the years after the financial crisis, we have seen a relative reticence of private companies to invest in large new projects, and due to lack of profit prospects. And also we have seen that service work is increasing relative to industrial so-called productive work, and productivity increases is not so easy to measure in service work. But what has the business response been? It has been tough time efficiency demands also in the service industry. And so the question is, will the new growth scenarios lead to more productivity growth and less demand for workers? And well, there is the answer. It's not easy, but we see that there's worries about demographic shortfalls in the long run and labor power in the short run. So there will be need for labor. It's not superfluous yet. Next, please. Left opportunities, openings through mainstream policies and tendencies through various things that are happening in the center. I would say international taxation is coming on the agenda to curb tech giants and tax havens, and that is on the international public agenda, the power agenda. Massive government investments and some social initiatives are part of it. There's a green agenda. There's the digging up of the roots of racism and its perpetuation today, fight against gender inequality and inequities. And we have a higher demand for labor, which is also always strengthening the labor side of the equation. Next, please. The left arena, where should it fight? Well, elections, parliaments, workplaces, and on the street, obviously. Should it formulate its main demands politely as political issues, investment, education, green developments, public transport, basic income, or should it mobilize and demand major changes such as democratic ownerships, or both, or simply fight inequities, racism, nationalism? Be critical. A lesson learned is that there is no political articulation and analysis. Movements will fail and die away. Parliamentary work is back in fashion. We see that. We see that Biden is showing some progressive agenda domestically. The Greens are strong in Germany, except these last days. But France, Italy, Spain, no. The Nordic countries, I wouldn't say that that is the case. Maybe not as bad as in the South. But in other places, that's an analysis. In England and UK, no. The left has to fight where the powers are concentrated, I would say, and therefore also the EU is a necessary arena. Here in Europe, there's this sort of hithering and dithering about the EU, but I think this has to be settled as simply, this is where we are, let us take it from there. Next, please. The contradictions, it's always good to talk about the contradictions, and they are so massive, I only mention a few here. The governments have called upon for support to businesses, thereby they're reinvigorating capital. They are really helping capital to an unheard of extent. Small versus big investment in companies. The small ones are growing, concentration of capital. The startups are coming, but they are either swallowed or fail. Demographic and labor shortage, immigration fear, and climate concern. These are the contradictions. We have a shortage of labor. On the other hand, we have fear of immigration, in the public arena, and climate concerns. We should have fewer people. Green growth, versus climate needs. They can come into contradiction. Green growth is not necessarily climate friendly ultimately. Stated goals versus willingness to pull through. We have a lot of hypocrisy. Governments state that they want to reach certain goals, but on the other hand, they don't do a lot to reach them. We have the public poverty and social welfare. Governments are not becoming more generous after the crisis, corona crisis, but public generosity is shown to research and development for business for green growth. Substitution of private capital for public support in the global south is going on now. Official development assistance is really being given up. We've seen it with UK. And on the other hand, we have the continuation of neocolonial policies in the guise of development, land grabbing, and so on and so forth. We have the internationalization of China. Should the West cooperate? Yeah. On the other hand, it will not. And there's competition and also interdependencies. And these things are not really worked out with China, which is such an important power. The strategies. Even the mainstream admits that there will have to be a massive rewiring of the global economy. This is from the former Bank of England Governor Matt Carney. Capitalist crisis openings may quickly close again. Capital has an ability to restore itself in unexpected ways. The strategy will have to come out of an undogmatic view of institutions, how to use them, how to fight their synergy with big business, parliamentary accommodation versus strikes and pressure. The left should always be aware that what looks good can be turned on its head. We have seen it with the free internet and social media. And the left should be aware of reification, things, targets, and so on and so forth. There's a tendency to think of climate in terms of targets and numbers. But on the other hand, who is benefiting? What are the social relations going with these changes? We have seen greenwashing, we see green grabbing of land. These phenomena have to be fought too. So one should not be just happy about every initiative in the climate crisis fight direction, because some of them will simply be to the benefit of powers that we may not like. And this is what we see with big corporate interests, not only with big windmill and solar parks. And is that what we want? We also power to X all of these new technologies that will be massive investments and will strengthen private capital. So the West is in need of strategies rather than maybe fixed policies, because it will always have to guide itself around what's happening. And then lastly, this is the very last point, reforms are very good, but on the other hand, one can be so infatuated with reforms that one forgets that the capitalist spaces will always try to form the reforms in another direction than they were intended first. So this is what I call revisionism, to think that you can just deal easily with the power structures as if they were just sensible conversation partners. This is not the case. You have to be skeptical always and critical. So this is my last words in this round, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Karen. And now it's open to the questions. Maybe, Andrea, you already have received some of the questions, or else they will probably be pouring in right after this very interesting presentation has been done. In the meantime, I could pose a question about the very interesting topic you mentioned towards the end about this green grabbing and the big corporate companies going as a major players in this. They are pushing certain agendas and sometimes rephrasing things in optimistic manners. What should left do? Join and change it from inside, or attack it from outside? What's the best strategy?
Well, it's very easy. It's a difficult question. One should be simply criticizing this and make others aware that it's not necessarily a good thing, everything that's happening. What we see, for example, here in Denmark is that many companies are buying land and planting trees. That sounds very good, but it may not be where these trees should be planted. It may not ideally for the environment, and so on and so forth. And in fact, what they do is they get land very cheap. And so for future purposes, they had this land. Okay, now they plant some trees, but who knows what's going to happen? So it's also a question of sort of demonstrating that we don't fall for everything that looks good on the surface. And we have in Africa, you have lots of land grabbing that is now also pretended to be green. Years ago, it was for agricultural purposes, and then these firms grabbing land pretended that they wanted to feed the world. They wanted to sell commodities to the world, obviously, but now it is sort of in order to help the greening of the world, and they are just amassing power, and power amassing is always dangerous. And so demonstrate and so on and so forth, make a political movement also against these things. Don't just say, oh, it's good, plant a tree and it's good. That's what I call, that's naive. Yeah.
Good. Then I have a couple questions. If I understand right, there is a question that is posed in the chat, and I will read for you now. It's how does the EU plan to combat companies moving production away from countries like Denmark due to CO2 restrictions? Can you say something about that? And besides that, there is also Rolf Cesklaba, sorry if I don't pronounce that properly, also had a question. So you may unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Yes, I want also to go into this contradiction which you named green growth versus climate needs. And especially also the role of the EU in fueling with biomass. Mm-hmm. It is really a big problem that the Renewable Energy Directive has been renewed, and it demands of the countries to use the full potential of biomass, not to plant trees, but to use it in energy sector. Have you any views on that?
Well, yeah, it's obviously it's very complicated because planting trees that are not being used for biomass is of course better than planting them for use as biomass. And even so, the first thing can also be a problem. No, this is a question, of course, of the parliamentary. Here, this is a strict political question. It's a question of the rules and regulations in the EU and in Denmark and how they are managed. The same with the first question about moving out of the EU, that this has to be dealt with at the highest level, and that is a question of lobbying and so on and so forth, because these are rules. I think I've seen that there are changes in the biomass regulations about using it for energy, and so that is ongoing, and that reflection and that is ongoing at a major scale. So that will happen, especially when our dear corporate companies are going full scale into power to X and so on and so forth based on windmills. Then they won't have so much interest in that other business anymore. At least the most powerful business will not. So in a way, some businesses can be an ally in some cases, depending on the issue. So that's why I'm saying it is so complex that you have new allies and all the time, or points that you have to pressure all the time. So one has to be very vigilant and agile, as the saying goes in private business. But EU pressure.
Okay, and then I have as well another question from somebody who only has a name as a Zoom user and want to pose a question. So I propose if you can maybe unmute yourself and
talk.
ask your question and maybe say just your name so we know.
Yeah. I don't know why it's not there. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
All right. I don't know why I don't have a name, but my name is Lucas. And one of the other things that I believe is a dilemma is that the growing energy need, at least in the developed part of the world, cannot match what we produce with green energy, and there need to be some alternative that does not include windmills, or at least from my understanding is that it's going to be very hard to compensate our energy needs. Have the European Union have any strategies for an example, expanding the option of nuclear or atomic energy as a way to compensate for the decreasing coal and natural gas energy that we're using today?
Yeah, Lucas, I am definitely not the EU, so I will not.
No, I'm sorry. No. But I mean, is there any actual strategies for this?
Let me. I know Africa for the energy point of view very well, and what is happening in Africa is there's massive investment in hydropower, and there's so massive investment that they're talking about the Ginger Dam in RDC, Congo, that could nearly fuel and electrify the whole of Africa. That's not necessary because there are lots of other power hydro dams, and they are built typically by Chinese, and the whole of West Africa is being basically fed in its major systems by hydropower. Within a few years, there's so many dams being built, also in East Africa on the Nile, both the blue and the white Nile. And then you have the Congo River system, which even can fuel down to South Africa. So, and you have, I mean, you have many hydro dams. I'm not saying it can cover everything. Fortunately, Africa does not have a lot of coal-fired power plants. And one of those they are now closing. It has not been a success. There are a few that are being built, but it is not something that is ongoing. There's a few gas plants because there are gas pipelines and so on and so forth, but I don't think that has a long future. So most countries are talking about these sources. Not so much wind, but solar, of course, and decentralized solar is very popular, and lots of projects. I mean, you can't even count them. But there are also those who talk about nuclear, but everybody thinks it's a pipe dream. I think there are some project in South Africa, which is the most developed country, obviously, but everywhere else, nobody really believes in it. So let's hope we can avoid coal and that gas will be phased out. And of course, hydropower has a lot of problems too. I mean, social problems when you build dams.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think I formulated myself wrong. I wasn't talking that much about the energy need of Africa. That's of course also rising. It was mainly the rising energy need in Europe.
Yeah, in Europe. Okay, thank you. That is well. Yeah, I do think I've seen various reports on that, and there are those who say that it can be done without resorting to black energy. But also you have to talk about the distribution. Should it be decentralized a lot more, or should it be concentrated? And how big plants do we need? I mean, what are the needs really in the future? Do we have the same structure of the economy? So I do believe that we can avoid nuclear, and definitely will vote for that as long as it is dangerous as it is now, and a very concentrated capital power. So let us. I mean, for a long time, realistically, we'll have natural gas as a major source. Then there's a question of can we use CSS, carbon capture and storage? Will that be developed so that these CO2 power plants will not emit on a net basis any CO2, but there's a lot to come, and I don't think that nuclear has a role to play, and not even for the powers that be. Germany has given it up, so let's hope that will continue. I know that there are some countries that have plans for it also, but yeah.
Good.
Thank
Yes.
you.
You mentioned as well another crisis that are not necessarily economic crisis, or as you said, not necessarily directly related, namely refugee crisis. Pia C. Jensen has a question about this issue. So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
My question is the following. Denmark is very aggressive in its refugee policy. Do you think other countries will follow the Danish example?
Well, that's a very good question. I certainly hope not. And I can, in that respect, I will hope that the EU, and sorry that also that the UN will have some influence, because the UN is also after Denmark, and the conventions that are governing the international world order. And so, no, I don't think, well, I mean, do I think? I really can only think. And so far, it does not look as if this is the case, but we don't know what's happening in France with the next presidential election. And there are lots of very nationalistic tendencies. So God only knows what's going to happen. But I hope in that sense, I hope that the progressive forces, the middle of the political spectrum, will hold, so that we can avoid these extreme rightist answers. But no, and one thing I think is happening, but that's only a hypothesis. I do think the Americans, the Biden regime is against this and will try to put pressure on European countries, including Denmark, not to go on with it. I think something is happening in that respect.
And going a little bit back to the issue of left possibilities and strategies in terms of the COVID crisis, Dorian Fertel has a question relating to this, asking about are we moving in the direction where politics of austerities will re-emerge, or is there some kind of emerging of the opposite? But maybe, Dorian, you can ask your question more precisely than I do, please.
Thank you, because I'm obviously I'm rather skeptical of the argument. Just quickly, just jumping back to the refugees also, it's important in any discussion of refugee policy, unfortunately, to look at Australia, where I grew up. And the Australian government has aggressively been pursuing an exporting of their model around the world, including to the EU. So what Denmark is doing now, Australia did 10, 20 years ago. Look south to look forward, unfortunately. But just my question is, so in the COVID crisis, in the aftermath, there's been some debate about whether or not there will be a return to or deepening of austerity politics, which we've experienced for the past 10 years, but there've been some changes. People talk about sometimes the EU's most recent budget as a sort of a paradigm shift of focusing more on big public investment, public services, or are we going to see another round of austerity, and will that take a different shape to last time? Or and how could the left respond to that or prepare to that? I'm skeptical of the argument that we've gone past austerity, but I think this is a debate which the left needs to be prepared for and know how to respond to, because some of the economic advisors for Corbyn, for example, were already beginning to believe that there was a shift, there was a change happening. And there are some on the left who genuinely believe that there's an opening up for example, greater public health, as one clear example because of COVID. Do you have an opinion on this? And is this a pipe dream? In which case, what can we do to make it not a pipe dream?
Well, I mean, fortunately, I believe that capital is ruling sort of surreptitiously. And if you take it from that point of view, yes, austerity will be coming back when it comes to social transfer payments. I believe we can see that here in this country anyway, that there's no more handouts to the lower end of the scale in the new reforms that are coming up. But on the other hand, there are big handouts to businesses for green development. And that's why I'm thinking that the corporate, you can also see that the corporate world is taking on the green agenda now, because now they can see they can make money out of it. They're getting a lot of extra support for R&D. They even investment support. I mean, they are just going for it now. So those that are smart, and that's more and more of them will go for that. So in that respect, we have a government largesse and not austerity, and also other investments like infrastructure and so on and so forth. Well, in the US, the infrastructure package is stalled because of the ultra-reactionary Republicans, but here in Europe, we have large infrastructure investments. And also, I think that some of the green investments that the governments are doing, they shouldn't be doing because these businesses could do them themselves. They do not need to support them. So there's a over support of private business in that respect. And therefore, I think that those leftists who think, oh, government should spend more on the green agenda. No, not necessarily. I mean, we have businesses and they should do their share as long as they have the money they do have. So I do think, like you, that austerity will be prevailing when it comes to the lower echelons of society. There's no sympathy for refugees. We can see that and everywhere, and the populations too. But I think there's a little change in population, the way the populations look at it, although some politicians have not realized that yet. But so, I mean, you see some polls showing that people are not so adverse to foreigners as they used to be, but these righteous politicians have not realized it. On the other hand, the right has found a new agenda, which is the COVID restrictions. So that has been their latest arena of fight. So, but it will be on a two-track. Governments will go on a two-track path, I think. Being large to business and not so large to people. When it comes to the health sector, it seems that you're right. It seems that everybody has realized that a health sector which is not supporting people's health is simply not a health sector which is helping business and society. So therefore, we may see a little bit more generosity in that respect. And also in social services that are benefiting the middle class, because the middle class is big still and has felt that it has been left out of the equation, and it's asking for better services for childcare and so on and so forth. And there you also see, I think, some increases. On the other hand, universities are being squeezed because what they produced is not so necessary. There's a hardcore analysis of what is necessary in terms of education. So, I mean, you have to analyze these things sector by sector. But if you keep in mind that they are really geared to the interests of private capital, at least you can see where it may go. So that anyway, that's how I analyze it. And I can also see little signs of what I'm saying, and that it is correct. I mean, that I have good indications for saying that. But obviously, we're in the middle of the fray. The story hasn't ended yet, and probably never will.
Okay, thanks again, Karen. There is another question from Lucas. I believe you can pose yourself again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is your point of view on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative that is affecting Africa, mainly the political soft power that the nations in Europe are losing, and thereby the Chinese government is gaining?
Well, I think that, well, if you look at, I mean, just first the numbers, I mean, there are some signs that they are keeping back a little now, that the Chinese are keeping back a little now because they have some outstanding debt that is not being paid. And they can see that they have also been too optimistic about what could be done. But they are basically going ahead. A lot of Chinese firms are also investing in private business in Africa. And that is, I mean, a huge phenomenon. And it is true that this is soft power. What I think is the most important thing for African governments is that this frees them from Western powers. Western powers have been sitting on them so massively, and so that they have not been able to formulate their own policies and what they really wanted. And with the Chinese generosity and not really determining the agenda, they are more free to turn against the Western powers. And so therefore, I don't think it will be a major problem that they get less development aid. Development aid has to a large extent become pretty superfluous, and it has been also been formulated in such a way that it hasn't been very constructive. So so that power, the Chinese power, is welcome, and it's very indirect. I don't think that they're not coming with they're not preaching anything, but of course they are setting certain agendas, that protocols. But I read a very interesting article about Chinese investments that they will tend to follow more the local rules than their own rules, because the rules from China when it comes to procurement, when it comes to a lot of things, project development, are very unclear. So they will follow the rules of the local of the countries. They can also be messed up in property disputes and so on and so forth. So they don't have perfect powers when it comes to doing their projects. So in a sense, obviously they're doing a lot of good things, but maybe they are over investing and putting up too big mega projects.
Thank you.
Another question, maybe that will be interested to think, is about one of these aims that left should maybe address. You pointed in your presentation that left maybe should formulate its main demands as a political issues. Can you elaborate a little bit on what do you think they should be, these main political issues?
Well, they should be, well, what should they be? They should be obviously worker rights organizations, also inciting workers to organize. And I see it very encouraging that you have seen labor unions also being engaged in political issues like the Palestine conflict in Europe these days, and showing solidarity with Palestine. Yeah, that should be the issue is the pressure to say, well, we're not satisfied with just putting up a policy that seems good and being critical of that policy, and also getting people to understand that. And I think that there's a lot of long way to go, because the left doesn't have the media to have a huge impact on public opinion, and that's something that it has to mobilize. And therefore I think it's good that you have these sort of demonstrations of young people who do spectacular things in the green agenda, because they sort of force the interest, but it should be followed up by other demands than just saying, well, you know, the 70% or 75% reduction of CO2 and so on and so forth. That should be a more concerted effort to go into that, and of course, where you have political parties, that should also be done. And I don't see that a lot is going on, at least not where those circles I know of. But obviously there's Germany, there are also other countries, and we should work together on these things and being aware of the danger points. So of course I don't have a very clear answer to that, but thinking is always a good thing. That's that's the first point.
I believe indeed it's an excellent answer. And but there is another question coming from Samuel Spillman. So please, you can ask the question.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Samuel.
Yes. Oh, all right. Hi, Karen. So, well, we met a couple years ago, and some stuff has been concerning me, particularly on the Chinese question. Well, what I would like to ask you is, well, I could start asking with the green question. You know, China in the last at least 13 years has been advancing a certain agenda regarding certain green technologies, or at least what we call green technologies, like I don't know, car motors and solar panels, etc. And at least this investment has been tending to advance or at least speed up a certain amount of technologies. But this is but an example of maybe a larger investment tendency regarding China. But in the last couple of years, what we've seen is that, well, at least in the United States, it has reached a point in which the US government is now acting in a certain way as to give at least a domestic response to China. So they are now, I don't know, doing a series of movements, right? They are investing not only in the technologies that China is putting forward, but also in others. But of course, there are also certain limits regarding the domestic politics and etc. But what I would like to ask you is that what are you seeing in this particular scenario, both regarding geopolitical answers, but also maybe a larger debate on the future of capitalism in the following decade? What are we looking forward to? Because this is maybe pointing to us towards I don't know, a certain rearrangement of the capitalist state structure towards a new engagement with development, which was maybe separated from the tendency from the last over 30 years, maybe 30 to 40 years. So this is my question to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that is the basic question, obviously. That is the question. And what I see is that there's a competition, that the US wants to be able to be a chip producer. I mean, all the essential technology productions where they have given licenses to China to produce and then importing the products. Now they will produce them themselves. So I do see there will be that the production will be reshored and be put in the major centers much more, so that China will be a little bit more, I mean, will be more isolated, will not be so integrated with the West. But I cannot see possibly that this can happen quickly, because the supply chains are so intertwined that none of us knows how complicated that is. A commodity has 50 parts that comes from all over the world and so on and so forth. Do we need these commodities? Maybe not, I don't know. But still, this is ongoing. So, but maybe the disruptions on the seas, that also will, I mean, having more expensive transport will also go in the direction of producing more locally. We have seen the need for vaccine productions in more countries. And then also the need for vaccine developments. So I do think that there's a certain decentralization in that sense, but it will be around major capitals in the different countries. I think that's what it seems to me anyway. I don't see sort of little pop and mom stores going up and producing chips. So in a way, it's hopeful that we have more decentralization from a point of view of socialism and everybody governing themselves and being happy and so on and so forth. On the other hand, it can also lead to increasing enmities geopolitically, because we know that as long as we live in a societies that are geared by that power, that drive to profit and money and so on and so forth, then it's difficult to see a very peaceful development coming out of that. So I mean, all these tendencies, what's happening in the Middle East, I mean, God only knows. And but when it comes to China and the US, I think it's clear that the US wants disentanglement. China realizes that that's necessary. Therefore, it will also so much and more involve itself with Asia, surrounding Asian countries, and it will play a role in Myanmar, obviously, and these conflicts. And that's also why the US is so interested in being over there. Then we have the whole Arctic question, which is something that preoccupies Danes, because we have Greenland. We have no idea what that will mean. It will mean something for transport. It will mean something for a lot of things. So really, we live in very exciting times, that's for sure. But I don't see any easy sort of socialism coming tomorrow anywhere in the world. I do see certain political positive signs, but you know, whenever you get a new government in Latin America that seems progressive, you know, the next time the opposite will happen. So I mean, in Peru you may get a new president, but what will that be, you know? And in Brazil you have your Bolsonaro, hopefully not too long, but so it's a very versatile situation. And that's also what I mean, there's also a lot of fight to do in the middle of the road. I mean, not just sort of the ultimate socialism, because we are also having all these major forces against us. So it is really resistance that more than sort of sitting there and designing futures that I think is necessary. I think it is to design future may be good for your own mental health, but it doesn't help a lot in the real world. So I cannot answer the question about China, but I see the tendencies, and I see China is very clear on what it's going to do. It's going to hold on to what it has. It will expand its interests. It also has interest in demographically in other countries. So battleground may be Africa because of this, but the Western powers haven't really come to realize what they can do in that respect, fortunately, because we don't want another sort of division of Africa.
Yes, so thank you very much. I believe this is what we could manage to do in this very interesting but short debate for tonight. Thank you very much indeed, Karen Helveg Petersen, Dr. Karen Helveg Petersen, for being with us, for answering some of the questions, and for excellent presentation. And thank you everybody else for being with us, and also for the very good questions. And yeah, I suggest that we all can say thank you, and maybe also unmute yourself and give just a short clap to Karen for today.
And I say thank you for the questions, and I enjoyed the conversation.